Hi everyone, Carter Krishnaiyer here for Beyond the 90. Had a great day in Jacksonville. Big announcement, Liam Fox, the new head coach of Sporting Jacks, a manager who comes in, Sporting Jacks on the men's side, I should mention. Stacey Ballum obviously managing them on the women's side of the USL Super League. Comes in with a great pedigree from Scotland, was a really good player. I remember him. Truthfully, I remember more as a player than as a manager, but his managerial career has been pretty good also in the Scottish Premier League and in the Scottish Football Pyramid. So, a really big announcement. Was very excited to be involved in it in Jacksonville, and we'll have obviously much more reaction and analysis beyond the 90. Jonathan Starling was there as well, and he wrote the story. I was able to release the first interview, the first non-club interview with the new manager, Liam Fox. So that was supposed to be the big news of Tuesday, November 4th in the world of American soccer. But it was not, because someone I'm very familiar with, and I think many of our listeners, many of our viewers, many of our readers are familiar with, Steve Malik, the owner of North Carolina FC, pulled another one. Very much fits the pattern of Steve Malik. Now, I wrote a piece that I will admit that I penned at an eatery in Jacksonville minutes before that press conference, before I drove to the press conference. So it wasn't quite a complete article, but I put a lot of my thoughts in it. And it's called Sinister or Cynical. North Carolina FC's move is one or the other and continues a long-term pattern from the club. So it included my personal experiences with NCFC, going back to when I became the communications director of the North American Soccer League early in 2010, in January 2010. The very first trip I made as comms director for the NASL was to Raleigh-Durham, or to Cary, North Carolina, Wake Met Soccer Park, specifically because that club, that market was so important to the new NASL 2.0. The Railhawks had been in USL, the old USL First Division those previous 3 years. They were going to be an anchor club of the new NASL, and they were. And it talked about how important the club was, how there were these ups and downs where we almost lost sanctioning from the U.S. Soccer Federation because of some of the problems we had with North Carolina FC, or with their Carolina Railhawks at the time, and their ownership at the time. Selby Wellman was their owner, who was I liked him. I liked him a lot. Liked his son Ryan. I know there's a lot out there about them, but I liked working with them, quite frankly. But obviously there was some problems with the management of the club. Then Traffic Sports, which of course owned the Fort Lauderdale Strikers and also was a major investor and in the NASL itself, and was was compensated with Class B shares in the NASL LLC, in addition to their ownership of Fort Lauderdale. Then had to assume ownership on what was always thought to be a temporary basis of Carolina, with minority partners that were locally based in the Triangle area. Because again, it was such an important club to survive, to keep going. And this was also the case where the decision was made to let go of clubs in Baltimore and St. Louis and let them fold. Those were, in theory, bigger markets. But if you know the culture of this sport in this country, so much of American soccer has run through the Triangle. In fact, I've said for years that so much of the intrigue within the U.S. Soccer Federation was hatched on the campus of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. So, and then you add Wake, and so you add Duke, and you add NC State, and you add Wake Forest down a little down the road in Greensboro. Of course, Wake Forest originally wasn't Wake Forest, which is kind of in that area. They're a little further away now. Wake Med, obviously, in Raleigh, Cary area. So important to the history and the development of the sport in this country. So let me not beat around the bush anymore. 2015, we have the FIFA scandal. Traffic has to sell. They'd already sold Fort Lauderdale. Fort Lauderdale was a club that it attracted interest when U.S. Soccer said traffic has to start divesting of these clubs. So they sold Fort Lauderdale first. The guy who came in and bought North Carolina, the Carolina Railhawks, later to become the North Carolina FC, was Steve Malik. And I have a lot of respect for some of the things Malik has done. He was able to rescue an NWSL side, Western New York Flash, who had come across hard times in Rochester and were the best team in the league and were about to fold. That was a good deed for soccer. He obviously was on the USSF board for years. We'll probably talk about that in a minute. And he, of course, was also, and I think this is really kind of critical to understand the whole evolution of things. He also was basically kind of the most vocal spokesperson for holding the NASL together in 2016 when Ottawa and Tampa Bay chose to leave the NASL and go to USL. That was really kind of the if it's a house of sticks, the two sticks taken out, Ottawa and Tampa Bay, the thing was going to collapse after that. Now we know inevitably when two teams made the lateral move, and in fact, when they committed to it, USL was not sanctioned as a second division. So in theory, Tampa Bay and Ottawa were going to move down a division to get out of the NASL, although them moving over was a big part of how USL was able to then apply for D2 sanctioning and get co-D2 status with the NASL going into 2017. Yet, during the course of 2017, Malik, who had been so instrumental in keeping the NASL together in 2016, I should mention by this time I'm not working for the NASL anymore. I left the league in 2013. I had a couple stints with Fort Lauderdale. My second stint with Fort Lauderdale ended in early 2017, and I went to work for Miami FC later that year. So there's a gap, and that gap is when a lot of this stuff went on, a lot of the intrigue. That Steve Malik found his way on the USSF board. He seemingly was rewarded for rescuing the Western New York Flash, rebranding them as North Carolina Courage, and as a result he launched a bid for an NASL team in the Triangle, as to Tampa Bay, by the way, under their then owner Bill Edwards. They even took out ads in Times Square advertising MLS to St. Pete. Malik, when he launched that MLS bid and got a seat on the USSF board, began to change. Like the whole complexion of his thought process and the way he was viewing what was going on internally in the NASL was at issue. And he eventually takes his team to USL. NASL loses sanctioning. Rocco Camiso, the owner of the Cosmos, begins very aggressively calling out Steve Malik as a mole in the room that destroyed the NASL. And Rocco Camiso expressed some of these thoughts in an interview with me that was published in the UK-based publication Sport Business. He also expressed these issues with Malik very vocally in an interview on our colleague here at Beyond the 90, Daniel Forrestine, did with him on Forrestine's Fire radio show, where I was then brought on as an analyst, right, to discuss what he had said. And I had a fairly high opinion of Steve Malik, and I felt like he had saved NASL for a year, gotten NASL an extra year, and that he had saved the North Carolina Courage, and maybe it was good to have a lower division owner sitting on the USSF board. So I didn't. I was always very sympathetic towards Rocco Camiso's point of view about U.S. soccer, and I think those of you who know me know that. And in fact, some of you who don't like me or don't like my opinions may have said I was shilling for Camiso through the years, which I was not. I just genuinely believed he was correct about U.S. soccer, and I continued to believe that even through the lawsuit going to trial earlier in 2025. But I did the one thing I did not necessarily agree with Camiso about was Malik. Now, Malik's actions since then have called a lot of this into question, because on one hand, I can absolutely sympathize with a club that is losing lots of money, that fan base is stagnated, that was drawing more people in 2009 and 2010 than they were in 2024 and 2025. I can absolutely sympathize with that. I don't know. I think their sponsorship situation is probably lousy. Wake Med Soccer Park, which was the crown jewel of facilities when I worked at the NASL, is now it's a soccer park, but it's now an older facility. And it is not in a good location. I mean, I think the club would and I know Malik himself would much rather have the club playing in Raleigh. And if you can't play in Raleigh, maybe you play to the Durham Chapel Hill area, where I think there's actually kind of more of a soccer hipster community anyway than in Raleigh. But the corporate money, the stuff you want if you're going to have a big-time professional club is in Raleigh. By the way, I'm saying all of this, and I maybe should have said this at the outset. I do not believe Malik's word that that this is being done because they want to go to Division I in USL. I think that's a smokescreen. So that's what I'm getting at. You fool me once, shame on me. Fool me twice, maybe again, shame on me. Fool me twice, fool me three times, shame on you. So Malik eventually he doesn't get the MLS team. Charlotte gets awarded an expansion franchise, which means Raleigh Durham is probably not getting an MLS team ever. Although ever is a long term, but that's maybe not. They're not getting anything in the near term. And so, what does he do? He self-relegates North Carolina FC to League One. And there were teams that have moved between the divisions in USL for years. There were teams that were Division II teams that self-relegated to Division III. In fact, at one time, Charleston, which is kind of one of the signature brands of Division II soccer in general, there were several years Charleston was out of D2 and went to D3. Even though in D2 they've been one of the best teams, and they've self-relegated because they didn't want to be part of all this soccer wars and the escalating costs. And now they have plenty of money, right? The Salvatore family has plenty of money, so they're back in D2 and they're thriving. Even when they lose the occasional home playoff game, they're still thriving. So it's not abnormal. The Long Island Rough Riders relegated themselves all the way from D2 to D4. I mean, it's happened, Western Mass. But it was at a particularly inopportune time because the USL was beginning to sell franchises at a higher dollar value for Division II, for the championship, when North Carolina FC did that. So I think he had already kind of blown it with USL, and there were people who were saying privately, well, this is the same guy that blew up the NASL, this is the same guy that seemed to have some sort of relationship with MLS, even though USL benefited from him blowing up the NASL. Let's not kid ourselves. But now, and as I said, was trying to be focused on Jacksonville's big news, and was at the press conference, was around town all day, but really all the phone calls I'm getting, all the text messages, all the conversations are about, oh yeah, it's great, good hire by Jacksonville. Let's talk about Steve Malik. Let's talk about North Carolina FC. In fact, there are going to be more conversations the next few days. I mean, I haven't talked to everybody yet, but I'm just giving some of my initial thoughts. Now, Malik has really undermined USL. So, first off, they have a postseason going on where, by default, because of Charleston losing and Lou City losing, North Carolina FC now has home field advantage for the rest of the Eastern Conference playoffs. And very well, if they win this week, might have, because I think Tulsa might lose. Honestly, New Mexico maybe doesn't. I mean, that's a little bit New Mexico, Orange County. New Mexico, Orange County, maybe New Mexico advances. But let's say Orange County wins. North Carolina would then, in theory, if they beat Rhode Island, have home field advantage for the rest of the entire USL playoffs. And yet, we're in a position where we're looking at potentially, not potentially, with this in play, having spent money on reinforcing the squad in mid-season, over the summer, having just given Finn Sundstrom a professional contract. ripped up his academy contract and gave him a professional contract. Now he can't go to college. They make this announcement as they're trying to sell tickets for a home playoff game this Saturday. It is so Steve Malik. And I don't believe a word of what I'm reading. And I saw the story in WRAL, which, by the way, their parent company is a minority investor in the North Carolina Courage. I think that ought to be disclosed. I saw their article saying this is all about the Courage, and if they can be in D1 on the men's side too, and they've seen what a major league town Raleigh is, and they can have a big stadium, 15,000 seat stadium in Raleigh. It's all BS. Okay, I've been fooled over and over again, and defended that organization, the North Carolina FC organization. It's nonsense. It's all nonsense. And you're undermining your players. The player contracts are now, I assume, going to be void. We have issues with the CBA and the union anyway going on right now in terms of next season and what the CBA will look like. That's a conversation for another day. But I have to tell you, this is one of the most cynical and sinister things. I'm going to go back to the title of my commentary piece that I've seen in the Wild West of lower division soccer. And I guess maybe Steve Malik's the guy who's mastered weaving in and out of these situations, and maybe being a survivor, but also creating a trail of tears behind him, all kinds of sorts of bad feelings. And this is terrible timing. I mean, I know from talking to some people at USL clubs, they were caught completely off guard by this. Maybe the league knew a week or two ago. Maybe. They were expecting the schedule to be completed in the next week or two. The people at clubs I've talked to. So this is not a situation which it's not a situation that's that can be taken lightly, and I think, quite frankly, this is something we're going to have to continue to cover. It's good. The playoff game, the North Carolina Rhode Island game on Saturday is going to be very uncomfortable. It's going to be an uncomfortable watch. It's going to be uncomfortable to think about. It's very upsetting. Also, what do those fans? Those fans have to know by now that this could be the last match for the club. Is there going to be a turnout at Wakeman? Are there going to be protests? Or people? I don't know. I just don't know. But yeah, keep it tuned to Beyond the Night. We're going to have much more on this.